Good evening, and welcome to our forum featuring the candidates for the office of Stratford County Sheriff. I'm Don Bryant. I will serve as the moderator for this evening's forum. Before we get started, just a reminder that our forum is being recorded and is being broadcast live on the Greater Dover Chamber of Commerce Facebook page. On behalf of the Greater Dover Chamber of Commerce, the Falls Chamber of Commerce, Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce, and New Hampshire Listens, we thank you for joining us for this Stratford County Sheriff's Candidate Forum. We look forward to getting to know the candidates who are able to join us this evening. We'll begin the evening with 2-minute opening statements from each of our candidates. I will then pose questions to the candidates that have been gathered prior to this evening by New Hampshire Listens. We'll then open up the questions to all of you. If you're joining us on Zoom, please use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen. If you're on Facebook, you can post your questions in the comment sections. Chamber and New Hampshire Listen staff will relay your questions to me, and I will further them on to the candidates. We will wrap this up strictly at 8 o'clock this evening. Candidates, we begin with your opening statements. We ask you to please keep your remarks to 2 minutes. We will proceed in alphabetical order by last name, and to start off the evening, we will hear from Mark Brave.
Good evening, Don. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank everyone for being here. My name is Mark Brave. I'm running for Stratford County Sheriff. I'll start by saying I've been in law enforcement now since 2009, spanning 3 states, Mass, Maine, and New Hampshire. I've also overseen campus safety for Great Bay Community College, Portsmouth, and Rochester campuses. I think that's important because my career did not just span in law enforcement, but in also the private sector and the educational setting. I had recently completed my graduate degree in forensic psychology, and I'm pretty proud of that because it took me about 6 years to complete due to 3 kids. Myself, my wife, Jamie, and my daughter, Grace, my son, Cal, and Mallory reside in Dover, New Hampshire, where we call home. They're all 3 in the Dover school system. I also do a lot of civic volunteerism, just some of them, one being the Board of Directors for Dover Seed, which stands for Seacoast Educational Endowment for Dover. We work really closely with the Dover school system. I volunteer for the Special Olympics. I was a coach for Dover Rec Basketball League, Habitat for Humanity, Big Brother, Big Sister program, and that's just a few of them. I believe a leader in law enforcement now should be community oriented, and that's what I am. And I also believe that law enforcement now is heading in a direction where a leader of law enforcement or a chief of police or sheriff in a law enforcement agency should be community oriented, because that's where law enforcement's heading. Again, I thank you for being here, and I look forward to your vote on September 8th.
Thank you very much. And continuing, we will next hear opening statements from Paul Callaghan.
Hey, good evening, and again, thank you for having this forum. My name is Paul Callaghan. I've been in law enforcement for over 33 years. 25 of those years have been at the Rochester Police Department, where I was born and raised and still live, and where I achieved the rank of captain, and I was a captain there for almost 8 years before I moved on to be chief of police in Kittery, Maine. And for the last 6.5, almost 7 years, I've worked at the Sheriff's Department, mainly as a prosecutor. In my current position, I also oversee the investigative unit. I've accomplished a lot in my career, starting with Rochester. When I was a captain overseeing the investigative unit, I was able to secure funds that cost the taxpayers no money by working with congressional delegates to be awarded a crime van that was loaded with equipment so we could process serious crimes such as murders, sexual assaults, and robberies. I was also one of the first DARE officers in the state of New Hampshire when I worked for Rochester. And I also was able to secure computer forensic equipment when I was at Rochester. And that allowed us to, again, this was about 15 years ago, that allowed us to expand our knowledge, and because I realized that computer crimes was going to be a tremendous issue for law enforcement and the community. So I want to make sure we were ahead of the curve to get that equipment. I've been on several law enforcement task force working groups. When the Attorney General of New Hampshire, Kelly Ayotte, started a computer forensic unit task force, I was asked to be on that task force. When the New Hampshire United States Attorney General started Gang Initiative Task Force, I was asked to be on that task force. When I moved over to Kittery, Maine, I hired the first 2 female officers that the department has ever had. One female officer was experienced, nationally expert in drug recognition, and the other one was well known for juvenile-related crimes. I also was able to analyze data and pinpoint crime where we successfully reduced crime in a 2-mile stretch in the town of Kittery and recovered thousands, tens of thousands of dollars in evidence. And when I moved over to the sheriff's department and actually was a captain, I was able to secure, with assistance of the ICAC, which is Internet Crimes Against Children, I was able to secure computer forensic equipment that all communities in Stratford County, all police departments in Stratford County can utilize. That was important because I knew it was a backlog at the state level. So we were able to get that computer forensic equipment done so these departments could download the evidence they needed to prosecute and arrest serious crimes such as sexual assaults, thefts, and investigations. Again, I look forward to your support on September 8th and again in the general election.
All right, thank you very much. Next, we will hear, continuing in alphabetical order, from Brandon Drysdale.
Thank you, Don. Brandon Drysdale, thank you for having me tonight and giving me the opportunity to share with you my background and campaign. I'm originally from Massachusetts and came to New Hampshire to attend UNH. After graduating, I continued to live in Stratford County for over 24 years. My wife, Rosanna, and I are currently Durham residents and raised our children in the Oyster River schools. I'm a retired New Hampshire police officer with over 21 years of service in Stratford County. I started my law enforcement career with the Somersworth Police Department and held many different positions to include school resource, DARE officer, detective, and patrol sergeant. I worked the remainder of my career for the Stratford County Sheriff's Office, having served with the agency for over 11 years. I again held many positions to include a task force officer with the U.S. Marshals, sergeant, and finally the founding commander of the Stratford County Drug Task Force before retiring in 2019 as a lieutenant. I'm running for sheriff to once again make contributions to an agency I care so much about. I'll use my knowledge and experience to move the agency to a better future. I will fulfill our statutory responsibility and make improvements to the services we provide. Under my leadership, the Sheriff's Office will provide quality dispatching services to the communities we serve, continue to provide a safe environment in the courts for those seeking justice, build stronger partnerships with county departments, as well as local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies, and most importantly, our community. I also believe we have a responsibility to curb the drug problem, but understand it needs to be a multifaceted approach involving prevention in our schools, enforcement, and treatment. I will continue to provide support to our local communities and focus on saving lives. Finally, I'll use my background as a financial advisor to build a responsible budget while avoiding duplication of services. And I'm here today to ask your vote for sheriff in the upcoming Democratic primary on September 8th. Thank you.
Thank you. And continuing in alphabetical order, we will hear next from Wayne Estes. Wayne, a 2-minute opening statement.
Thank you, Don, and the chamber. My name is Wayne Estes. I grew up in Dover. I was hired on the Sheriff's Department in 1978. I spent 42 years there altogether. The first, up until 2002, is when I retired at the rank of captain with Stratford County Sheriff's Department, and I ran for the office of sheriff. The people of Stratford County elected me sheriff and did so again for another 4 terms. Then I decided to retire and move south. I retired and Sheriff Dubois was elected sheriff of Stratford County. Found out Sheriff Dubois wasn't running again. I had decided after I retired that I wasn't done at Stratford County Sheriff's Office. I still feel I have a lot to contribute. During my time as sheriff, I worked on 4 contracts with the federal government. That helps bring in the $10 million in revenue every year to Stratford County residents. When I left, it was at 7, now it's at 10 million that's brought in. After I retired, as I come back from Florida every summer over those years, I worked in the sheriff's office helping out, doing the federal transports, doing hospital details, whatever the sheriff needed me to do, they would call me and I'd come in if I was available. My interest in serving, other than the sheriff's office, is 10 years ago became the ambassador for the state of New Hampshire for Hunt of a Lifetime. That is a program that does moose hunts, bear hunts, whatever a child wants. A child has to have a life-threatening illness. 2 years ago, the legislature changed that, and it's not under the Hunt of a Lifetime program anymore. It's under the New Hampshire Wildlife Federation, which the New Hampshire Wildlife Federation reached out and is still having me help and go north every October 1st and help a child with a life-threatening illness achieve their accomplishment of a moose, bear, or whatever they want to do. I have a total of 42 years in Stratford County Sheriff's Office.
All right, thank you very much. And last but not least, we will hear a 2-minute opening statement from Tracy Hayes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tracy Hayes. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about me and understand why I am the best candidate for sheriff. I received my bachelor's degree from Dartmouth College, and while working full-time as a police officer in Rochester, I went on to study business and received my master's in business administration and a master's in organizational leadership. I spent my law enforcement career serving the community, earning me several awards, and have served on numerous committees and boards, to include Community Partners, Homeless Center of Stratford County, and so many more. I joined the Stratford County Sheriff's Office in 2015 as a deputy, and after being promoted several times, I currently serve the people of Stratford County as the major, being 3rd in command, and I've overseen every aspect of the Sheriff's Office, including all financial and budgetary matters, and our 24/7 dispatch center. My platform for this election is something I have always believed in: acceptance and accountability. I have experienced discrimination both personally and professionally, so when I talk about acceptance, it's threefold. First, we all need to be accepting of the community and embrace our differences. Second, law enforcement officers need to learn to accept each other and to understand that new ideas are a good thing, and that the old way isn't necessarily the only way or even the best way. And third, law enforcement officers need to accept responsibility for their actions. And when I talk about accountability, I'm saying that officers need to be held accountable for their actions. I believe that so many of the problems we see around the country with police officers doing the wrong thing isn't just an issue with the officer or their training, it's an issue with leadership. The leader of an organization needs to set the tone for the agency on what's acceptable and what is not. And they need to be held accountable for their actions when they do something morally, ethically, or legally wrong. So if you're looking for a great leader and you believe in acceptance and accountability in law enforcement, then please vote for me. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, candidates. We'll now proceed to the questions. And again, these questions were prepared in advance by New Hampshire citizens. I will direct the individual questions to one candidate, but if any of the other candidates feel that they would also like to respond to that question, if they could raise their hand, and we should be able to see you raise your hand, and we will call upon you. And I'm going to start with Tracy Hayes, this first question directed to you. In many ways, politics is a conversation about the proper exercise of power and authority. In this contest, in what conversations about power and authority must the Sheriff's Department engage, and with whom? So
the Sheriff's Office must engage the issue of power with the community. Community it's all about policing within the community, and I've done the community policing thing, but the Sheriff's Office and the position of sheriff is so much more than being a person that lays the groundwork for leadership. It's a leadership of those that need to be out there building those relationships. So we need to build a relationship with every stakeholder, and that includes the community.
All right. Anyone else? All right. The next question we will direct to Wayne Estes. Given that we will likely be living in a time of financial constraint for several years, can you speak to what a proper budget for the department looks like, and what would you prioritize?
Well, first, we have to prioritize what the sheriff's office is mandated to do. They're mandated to serve civil process and to transport prisoners. The budget went up by, I believe, over $1 million in the last 8 years. I actually, in May, had a discussion with Sheriff Dubois when we had this pandemic going on, and had asked him why there hadn't been layoffs already, because there wasn't the work for the deputies transporting prisoners to the courts, to the federal courts, and working with immigration and the U.S. Marshals. So the revenue wasn't coming in. That's why there's a shortfall, and they had to lay off the 10 people that they did.
All right. Anyone else? Tracy Hayes?
So beyond just what's mandated by the courts, and I agree that that is obviously a priority, I think a huge priority is going to be training. So I have been working with the Race and Equity Series in New Hampshire as a co-facilitator, and through that work, I've presented to the Governor's Commission on Law Enforcement Accountability, and I have written a grant and a proposal to conduct training for all officers in the state for implicit bias. But beyond that, other trainings are incredibly important to build that trust with the community. De-escalation. We also teach a concept called dual life values, where we can detest the crime that the person has committed, but we value their life. So we value the life of the officer as well as the life of the person, that the individual that we're dealing with. We have a way of creating trainings in this agency where ethics drive tactics, which drive our techniques. So we have a focus on training to make sure that everybody has the tools to do their job, and they will be held accountable when they do something morally, ethically, or legally wrong.
All right. Paul Callaghan?
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
I got some buttons showed up here. Hold on a second. Yes, I want to expand on the training. We've had the accreditation on law enforcement, the Governor's Commission, that when I hit the ground, I will hit the ground running on January 1st. That is certainly a need to increase our training. We need to increase it in racial bias training. We need to increase it in implicit bias training, de-escalation, and we definitely need to increase our training more than what we do per year.
Okay. Brandon, I saw your hand up also.
Yeah, can you hear me, Don?
Yes.
Right now, what we're dealing with the budget is really a temporary issue. COVID-19 will come to an end at some point, and eventually this work that we've been dealing with as far as prisoner transportation for the U.S. Marshals and immigration, that will return. And eventually we're going to need staff again to be able to do that work. So my plan is to recruit per diem and part-time law enforcement officers that are going to provide a cost savings to our agency. We used to rely many years ago on a lot of part-timers and per diems, and we got away from that. Full-timers are expensive because they do have benefits. Per diems, they don't have benefits, and they're on call, meaning if the work's there and it's available, we can rely on those individuals and bring them in. But if the work is not there, it doesn't cost the agency as much to have them on the books. So my plan is to, during my entire career, I've made connections with some great law enforcement officers, is to be able to bring those individuals in when that work returns and really improve the agency, and as well as provide a cost savings to the taxpayers.
Right. All right. This next question, I have to move on to the next question, and this is directed to Brandon Drysdale. What are your thoughts about transparency and the challenge of navigating the need to be both transparent with the public and respect the privacy of citizens and officers?
Well, being transparent is being able to provide the information that we can to the community while respecting the privacy of both officers and citizens. I know right now, currently when we're dealing with officer misconduct, internal investigations, those are private matters. We're not allowed to release information to the public about specifically what those are. We are an accredited agency, so we do provide statistics about internal investigations, how many were conducted, and we do provide complainants with information in regards to the resolution of that particular complaint with the citizens of the public. So we're both providing not only to the complainant information in regards to what their concerns were and what the resolution was, but we also do provide statistics related to officer misconduct, how many cases were investigated by the agency, and that's actually posted at the sheriff's office. That's required as a accredited agency to provide that information to the public. I think that's excellent because it does show that we are policing ourselves, we're complying with our own policies and procedures, and that we're really trying to do the best for the community.
Right. Paul Callaghan?
And thank you. Issue of transparency. I agree with the Law Enforcement Commission that Governor Sununu put together when they said they should release the lorry list, the EES list. I believe that should be released. And I also like the idea that there's going to be that they're recommending a private citizens group to review use of force incidents in the state of New Hampshire. I think that will improve public trust.
Anyone else? Tracy Hayes?
So as far as transparency goes, we process any 91A requests that come into the office. As far as internal investigations go, we actually have a process where anybody, I know a lot of what people are talking about is having a civilian oversight board. It's something that does eventually, if contested, move up to through our process already built in place. We will go to the commissioners who are also elected by the people. So in that sense, we are fairly transparent while respecting the privacy for personnel matters.
All right, Mark Brave?
I'm just going to be short on this. I believe that all internal investigations should be taken out of the agency that the law enforcement officer is being investigated in. I'm sorry to say, but, and again, you know, these awesome candidates on the website with me, the Zoom with me will say, or won't say, but I will say it. It's hard not to be biased. I hang out with some of these officers. I hang out with friends. They're great people outside of work, but if I was put in a situation as a lieutenant to investigate a friend of mine's where my kids play with their kids, or I've gone golfing or fishing or whatever with them, I'm going to have some bias. We as a community, we as a state need to figure a way to cover all of the lawful issues with that, union issues, but we need to be able to be transparent 100% and not investigate that. I believe in keeping policy violations into the individual agencies, but in terms of things other than policy violations, I believe in taking that completely out. I mean, it's open for conversation, state level, you know, county level, but that's my opinion.
We're going to move on to the next question. I know you wanted to jump back in, but I've got to move on to the next question, and it's directed to Paul Callaghan. What is the proper relationship between a sheriff's office and the federal government? In what ways does partnering with the federal government, with ICE, for example, enable and or hinder the department's ability to have a constructive relationship with the community?
Well, that's a good question. I think that's kind of a misconception to the public that we have a professional relationship with ICE. What the county has is a contract with ICE to hold the ICE inmates at the Stratford County Jail because it's a great facility. We're in charge to transport them based on the when they needed transport for court. So I don't believe real relationship. There is a contract, but I don't believe our relationship is strictly with ICE. We just transport for them, for the jail, for whatever hearings they have or whatever pickups they need to have. So I think we need to be clear on that, and so the community knows that we're not an armed ICE. Our jail holds ICE inmates, and we transport them.
Right. Anyone else want to jump in on that question? Brandon?
Yeah, I would just like to add, we've always had a great relationship with the United States Marshal Service. And I personally had an experience being on the New Hampshire Joint Fugitive Task Force as a Special Deputy U.S. Marshal. It's an incredible service when we have law enforcement in this area who can't apprehend a suspect because they don't have the resources. And that relationship that we had with the United States Marshals to be able to track down wanted individuals that the smaller communities and the communities in this county could not do themselves, and have a wide reach with that federal authority in New England and beyond to be able to apprehend people and bring them to justice was an excellent partnership that we've had over many years since I've been at the sheriff's office, and I value it tremendously. So I just like to add that that's an important piece of what we're seeing with some federal funding.
All right. Wayne Estes?
Yes, Don. I was the sheriff that did the agreement with the U.S. Marshals for the Fugitive Task Force. I was the sheriff that actually assigned Brandon to that task force. At that time, we had 2 deputies that were assigned to the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force. There's the other agreements are transport prisoners for New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, and Maine Marshals, and for ICE. They house those prisoners at Stratford County Jail. That's where the revenue comes in, and they reimburse Stratford County for the deputies' times, and that's where all the revenue comes from. So, if people say we shouldn't be involved with immigration, well, we have an agreement also with the FBI that they have the computer system so we can run NCIC checks. Now, what if the federal government said, well, your agency won't work with us and help us when we need help, then you can't use NCIC. So if your house is robbed and the things stolen from your house can't be entered in the computer and be watched for nationwide. That's what I believe, that we have to work with all law enforcement agencies, no matter whether it's Dover PD, Rollinsford PD, U.S. Marshals, Immigration, ICE, or that's Immigration, FBI. We got to work with them all. Law enforcement has to work together and communicate together.
All right. All right, the next question is directed to Mark Brave. What systemic issues in the county and the state impact equity issues around policing? How, aside from additional training, can the Sheriff's Department participate with community in addressing them?
That's a great question. So I believe that first and foremost, we as law enforcement officers, me being probably the youngest one out of all the candidates, need to start thinking new age law enforcement, where law enforcement's going, where it's going to be for our kids. I believe that community policing is going to be tenfold, and it won't just be a school resource officer or a unit. It's going to be systematic, from the sheriff or the chief deputy or the chief of police of a town down to the newest recruit. And that's going to be the same at the academy, which is at up at Concord. I believe that we need to address this issue with an open mind and an legit open dialogue. Not this, well, we'll talk about it if you keep these things out of the question, like out of the conversation. We need to open it up for ideas and accept those ideas from the different community members we have. So I think an open dialogue, an honest dialogue, and not one-sided, will accomplish that, or head in the right direction, I should say, because this has been going on for way too long, and I don't think we're going to fix it in a year. So, or 2 years.
Anyone else? Paul Callaghan?
Thank you. We do have a community policing program at the Sheriff's Department. We do the compliance checks for drug court. Our Stratford County Drug Court is nationally recognized, which is a program that keeps drug offenders out of jail and in the community. So at least, usually at least once a week, if possible, we'll send out 2, sometimes 4 deputies to do compliance checks on these folks. We've been doing it for about a year, and it's been very positive with the judge. It's been recognized throughout the state, and the officers enjoy it. Now that brings trust with the community. It brings trust with the chiefs, and it brings trust with the actual defendants that we're checking on, because it's not so much we want to check and find you doing something bad. We're checking on you and finding you doing something good. So when somebody is found not in compliance, obviously they're held accountable, but majority of the time we're finding something good and we write about it.
Tracy Hayes?
So I think one of the main systemic issues that we deal with is obviously discrimination. And I've been discriminated both personally and professionally, from being refused service in a restaurant to walking into a small country store and having a mother say to her young son, "Hey, look at that. You'll never see one of those again." So that was hurtful. And even professionally, my nickname for the longest time was Check, because I checked off 2 boxes in a white male dominated profession. So I was female was one check and minority was another check. I think to deal with these issues, it starts with the hiring process, starts with psychological testing. Obviously, you said beyond training, that training is a huge component of it. But beyond that, you need to set a tone of acceptance within the organization, amongst each other. And it starts with the leader of the organization, and to set a tone and a culture of what's acceptable and what isn't. And as far as community policing goes, community policing is a 1980s term. Contemporary policing involves social justice, fair and impartial policing. We can't fix the problems of today with a community policing idea from decades ago. We need to think outside the box and accept the community and each other and hold each other accountable for our actions. It's about giving the community a voice.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? All right, we will direct our next question. We'll go right back to the top of the list. Mark Brave, in what ways might data-driven policing, as currently practiced, exacerbate underlying systemic injustice in society? What would you do to ensure that any data-driven programs are equitable?
I believe one, data-driven information in law enforcement it's not accurate 100%. I believe that me, as if elected sheriff, I would have to go out there and actually be involved in the community. And I believe that one way of doing that would be actually staying in contact monthly with the different groups, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's the Indonesian community in Somersworth, whether it's church groups, whether it's different recreational groups, just because then you can hear different stories on what happened during a traffic stop, or hey, a police officer pulled me over, or a sheriff pulled me over, and this is what they said, or this is what I experienced. You need real life information, because obviously if you believe what's on paper, you're just going to be steered wrong. So you need to know for sure that the information we're receiving as an agency is accurate, and we just can't act on it. So in New Hampshire, obviously we don't have a lot of minorities. So if in a community someone's pulled over and they happen to be Black, white, Black or Hispanic or Asian, Indonesian, that data is going to show, higher than if it was in Dorchester, Massachusetts. So I think it's important to actually, a leader of an agency, to stay connected with the community so that they get some background to that data. and they can report on that.
All right. Anyone else want to jump in on that question? Paul Callaghan?
Sure, just quickly, any data-driven programs, I believe at the end of the year, or maybe even monthly or quarterly, that we should release the data based on age, sex, and time of day, and obviously race of the subjects that were arrested. And again, that is also a recommendation from the New Hampshire Law Enforcement Accreditation Commission. And just quickly, I just want to make a quick comment on what Tracy Hayes said about community policing being 1980s term. It's certainly not. It's appropriate now.
Anyone else want to jump in on that particular question? Tracy, I'll let you jump in.
All right. So data-driven policing is just one piece of policing. Obviously, we need to get those numbers to see what is and is not happening. And that is something we already currently do at the Sheriff's Office. Those numbers are gathered and they're reported to our accreditation agency, and to ensure that we aren't discriminating or any other numbers that we can find that show outside the norm type of statistics. And as far as community policing goes, the IACP has actually changed the definition of community policing to reflect exactly what I had mentioned earlier. So the definition of community policing from 1980s to actually today, the IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, has actually changed the definition within the last few months.
All right, Mark Brave, I saw your hand up. I'll let you very quickly.
Real quick, I just want to add with the data-driven data, it's also human-driven. So now you're adding officers' personal emotions, you know, whether or not they reported that traffic stop to dispatch or whatnot. But someone's going to leave that stop or that incident with a different feeling. So data is still human-driven, and that's the issue we're having today in law enforcement. Is because behind the badge, there's still a human with their own personal thoughts. So,
All right. Next question directed to Paul Callaghan. What factors make it hard for officers to speak up if a fellow officer's actions are putting themselves or the community members at risk? Where and how might a sheriff intervene to change that culture?
That's another great question, and that is when I made my announcement I was going to run for sheriff of Stratford County. I brought that up. There's a program that New Orleans Police Department has had in the works for about a year addressing that issue. An officer sees a safety issue involving another officer or a sergeant, that to encourage them and to peer support for them to report it. And again, the Governor Sununu on July 16th of this year signed a bill that goes into effect January 1st under the RSA 627.5 section that law enforcement officers must report use of force, abuse of force. Under that definition, they must report it to their chief immediately, and the chief has to report it to PTS, Police Standards and Training Council, within 7 days.
Mark Brave?
I'll just add to that. Again, that's human driven. So you're now putting that back into the hands of that officer. And if that officer is one of the small bad apples in an agency that's just that's just doing a use of force incident, not to do it, but that person has an internal issue, now you're putting it on them to report that. And that's where we are in today's world. You're putting too much on an individual officer without dictating, you know, whether it's body worn cameras or it's going to be documented third party, so that, okay, this officer is reporting this, but the camera doesn't match what he just or she just said. So I think, again, this is going all, I don't have the answer to it, and that's where community comes in and dialogue, but it's all human driven. So you're expecting an officer to report an issue. Not all officers do. I know a lot of great officers, family-oriented people, but there are a small small group out there that will not report an incident that could potentially end their career.
All right, Tracy Hayes, I saw your hand up.
So I think this goes right back to my platform, which is acceptance and accountability. The leader of the organization, the leader of that law enforcement agency needs to set the tone on what is acceptable and what is not. And when those things are understood within the agency, they'll know that they will be held accountable when they do anything morally, ethically, or legally wrong.
All right, Brandon Drysdale, I saw your hand up also.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Really what we need to make sure is that we're promoting qualified people. You know, we need to make sure that we have excellent supervisors, people that deserve to be in the positions that they are, and that they are to be the individuals with appropriate supervision that could take corrective action and make sure that we can give officers the proper training. It doesn't necessarily mean, depending on the situation, that we're going to be terminating this individual. It might just be an incident of we just need to have corrective action with some extra training to help them perform the job better.
All right, anyone else? Wayne? Wayne?
I feel that the officer that sees something should either stop it right on the spot or should report it to their supervisors. If they don't, that they're just as guilty as the person committing the crime or doing something wrong. One bad apple makes it look bad for all the rest of us, and the officers have to report this stuff.
All right. All right, the next question is directed to Brandon Drysdale. What factors suppress new ideas in law enforcement in general and the Stratford County Sheriff's Office in particular? Where and how might a sheriff intervene to change that culture?
Don, can you ask that question one more time, please?
Certainly. What factors suppress new ideas in law enforcement in general and the Stratford County Sheriff's Office in particular? Where and how might a sheriff intervene to change this culture?
Well, I think we just have to be open to new ideas. I know things are always changing in law enforcement. Law enforcement's changed drastically since even when I started back in 1997. Laws were different. Things that were acceptable back then are not acceptable today. We need to just be in tune to what the latest information is that we have related to studies about law enforcement, policies, procedures. I know CALEA does help us with that because they are giving us up-to-date policies that we need to conform to. So I think that certainly helps keep our agency moving in the right direction. But we definitely have to be open to new ideas. Things are just constantly changing. And if we don't, then we're just going to fall behind. And I know that during the time that I started the Sheriff's Office, even back from 2007, the Sheriff's Office has changed tremendously. It had grown with the staffing, the equipment that we issued. At one point, we weren't allowed to have tasers, and then eventually we implemented tasers into the agency. So constantly being open to new equipment, to new ideas, to changes, those are important things that will help move our agency in the right direction.
Mark Brave?
Again, like Brandon said, opening, the door to new ideas, new suggestions. The misconception in law enforcement is, it's a good old boys club. We're going to protect each other. We're going to ensure that, we all go home at night, which is true. When I put the uniform on, when I was a patrolman, I'm going to make sure that I do the best job I can to make sure I go home or anyone I interact with goes home, because I treat them with dignity and respect. Keeping an open dialogue. And the one thing I noticed in my young career, okay, I'm not going to sit here and say I have all this knowledge, but in my young career, I noticed when you explain to people why you're doing what you're doing and not just leaving it as, I pull you over. Here's why, and then you're the, know-it-all, as opposed to trying to understand, that person and why they're speeding or whatever they're doing. Explaining why you're doing what you're doing as an agency to the community will go a long way. I know that's new to law enforcement because we always want to be tactful in the information we disclose to the community, but I believe that's going to be one of the reasons why we accomplished this mission we're on of inclusion with everyone.
Paul Callaghan?
Thank you. Again, it starts at the top. You need to have a sheriff that doesn't have the office closed, is not around. You manage by walking around and sets the tone to create new ideas. And I think the frontline supervisors are a great asset to create new ideas by just mentoring and coaching the officers that they work with under their command.
Anyone? Wayne Estes?
Don, I was the sheriff that started the career in Stratford County. We did the dispatch center first, which was the first dispatch center nationally accredited north of New Jersey. And you know the gentleman that I had doing it, Jim Rowe, go back some years. He was the one that helped me with that and was my accreditation manager. When I took office in 2003, I started in writing policies. At that time, there was 3/4 of an inch of policies there. When I left in 2012, there was 9 inches of policies on how the deputies were to act and deal with people. And also, you might know, my business card had my cell phone number, my home number, my office number. I was the sheriff that anybody could reach. People called me at my home or on my cell phone at 2 o'clock in the morning if they had a problem. And I always took the call, dealt with the public, and helped them out whenever I could.
All right. And Tracy Hayes, I believe you had your hand up also.
Did. So I agree, it starts at the top, that the leader of the organization actually has to make sure that people understand what's acceptable, and what should be acceptable is being open to new ideas, accepting of each other, accepting of the community. And those new ideas are going to be what drive the organization.
All right. All right. Thank you very much. Our next question we are directing to Wayne Estes. Where do you see that the sheriff's office is being asked to do things that should and can be handled by other agencies or organizations? In what ways might you shift these responsibilities from the sheriff's office to those other organizations?
Well, the sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer of the county. I don't know why we would be shifting any of the duties of the sheriff or a law enforcement officer to any other agency if somebody called for help. Or I can't imagine your question, why we would shift it, you know, other than certain internal investigations you turn over to another agency, depending on the investigation or an expert. I can remember one case where I brought, actually 2 cases where I brought former Chief Charlie Reynolds in to do an internal investigation when I was the sheriff.
Right.
So I can't imagine, Don, where the sheriff would be shifting it other than an internal investigation.
All right. Anyone else want to jump in on that question? Mark Grave?
Yeah, so like Mr. Estes said, I believe that the sheriff's office going forward should be a centralized location for any issues any of the small towns are having that would eat up their manpower because they're a small town. And because the sheriff's office could eventually investigate something to a point where once it gets to the county attorney's office, it wouldn't affect us as much. It shouldn't be shifted to the smaller towns, or depend on the sensitivity, obviously, but it should stay with the sheriff's office. Obviously, a PD can't transport prisoners for IEAs. I mean, that's generally what we do. They can, but I mean, I don't remember the last time that happened, or deal with our federal partners or anything. So I think it should stay with the sheriff's office, just to take the burden off the smaller towns.
All right. Brandon?
I just want to add, I think that the sheriff's office adds value to the county law enforcement by providing support services. One of the things I strongly believe in is not duplicating services. We don't have a patrol division at Stratford County. We don't provide primary policing services for any agency. Every single town and city in this county has a police department. If we can support them in some sort of way with some of the resources we have, whether it's equipment, specialized positions that can offer those types of things, that's great. But we just want to make sure we want to avoid duplicating services, because there's no reason right now for us to have a separate patrol division when every single community in town, including state police, is out there patrolling. That's one of the things I strongly believe in and make sure I'll avoid if I become sheriff.
All right, Tracy Hayes, I saw your hand up.
I agree that there are certain responsibilities of the sheriff's office, and those can't be shifted outside. In fact, the sheriff's office should be that central organization, that the law enforcement agency that smaller towns can rely on to shift their burdens to us, to help alleviate some of their issues, such as investigations on other officers, which we have done in the past, and we are currently conducting several as well.
All right, Paul Callaghan.
Sure. I mentioned in my opening that I noticed a need in the county for forensic computer equipment. The reason being is the state lab is overburdened with work. So if one of our police agencies in the county needed a phone downloaded for evidence, they could wait a month or even longer. Now that we got that computer equipment that was free, it didn't cost us anything, we're able to get that information to them within a day or 2 days. And again, we've done some serious work, such as downloading information off computers and phones for homicides in this county.
All right. The next question is directed to Tracy Hayes. What relationships with key stakeholders are less than ideal, and how would you repair them, and why do they matter?
Some of the relationships that we have dealt with are with other chiefs of police, with other agencies. Sometimes there may be issues amongst the leaders of the organization. I think no matter what the relationship is, it always comes down to communication. And if we just communicate, we will ensure that we can rebuild that relationship. Currently, I can't think of any relationships that we have that are less than ideal. We have relationships with immigrant communities and immigrant leaders and other law enforcement agencies. So there are always going to be issues going on, but we can always rebuild those with communication.
Wayne, was that your hand that I just saw? Did you want to respond to that question, Wayne?
Oh, no, somebody was calling and I hit my phone.
All right. Mark Brave?
I wasn't actually hearing what she was saying because somebody was calling into my phone and I just shut it off.
Mark?
So I would say in regards to that, and again, I don't have any real reason to know this, but historically in law enforcement relationship with fire has been very, historically one of those comical things that we as law enforcement, police officers, deputies, firefighters, etc., we make fun of each other. I think that the sheriff's office can become a centralized location to bridge that gap between that relationship. And I think the way we do that, obviously firefighters, some of them don't have any needs. They don't want to be police officers. A lot of police officers would like to become firefighters, but I believe that understanding what they go through, what their needs are, so we're not just showing up to a scene and becoming the traffic person or blocking a road off, whether it's a sheriff or a chief of police dealing with the chief of fire and providing that service to them, whether it's communications, whether it's extra deputies to secure a scene because they're most of the time firefighters show up to a scene that's still a pretty hot scene in law enforcement eyes, and they depend on us to protect them, and we depend on them to watch our back. So I think that would be one. I think Stratford County and the fire fighters in Stratford County have a pretty good relationship, but I think that's something that can be worked on even more, and we could, as one, move into the future together. So.
All right. Anyone else? Paul Callaghan?
Thank you. We have, of course, before COVID struck, we had monthly meetings with all the chiefs. We'd meet at Stratford County Chiefs, and that was a great opportunity to communicate and to build that relationship with the stakeholders.
And Brandon Drysdale, I saw your hand up.
Yes, Don, it's really about building partnerships. During the time that I've been in law enforcement, what I've seen has degraded the mission has been the power struggle. We have to realize that whether we're a small city or a town, county, state, or federal, that we need to work together for the benefit of the mission, for the benefit of what the end goal is. And what clouds that is when we start to have what I would say, for lack of better terms, turf wars. We start to have power struggles about whose responsibility is what and who may be more important. But in reality is we really have to stay focused on what we're trying to do for the community and what benefits us and keep us safe.
All right, thank you. I'm not sure if we've received any questions either from our Zoom audience or our Facebook audience. If we do, I will ask our technical people to forward them to me. This next question is a toss-up question. Whoever wants to jump in and answer it will just raise your hand. In what ways are hiring and training insufficient to address the systemic factors that are expressed as racial injustice and police brutality? What is the proper role of sheriff and sheriff's departments in addressing these underlying factors? Who would like to go first? Mark Brave?
So I would say, obviously, it's a loaded question because there's a lot of pieces to it. But I would say, again, we have to remember we're in New Hampshire. We're not in Chicago or Miami, Florida. But I believe that down the road, the sheriff's office can be that place where, again, the centralized location for these towns, we could be the recruiting mecca, I guess, for Stratford County. Just, again, thinking outside the box, going to places like, Boston or some of the colleges in Boston, or even UNH, even, up in Maine, and recruiting some of the minorities that would make Stratford County a better place because you have a different view. You have a view from someone that's lived the life of someone in the past, in the driver's seat, getting pulled over by, a white officer, and they can relate to that. I believe that, again, it's something where we as a community will, and other agencies will have to bridge, come together in our monthly meetings and talk about, hey, you Durham PD, Milton PD, Farmington, Rochester, Rollinsford, what do you guys need? Madbury, do you want me to send a training sergeant out or deputy out to so-and-so? We can, write up something or whatnot and help you bridge that gap that you're trying to bridge, because again, the one thing with Stratford County Chiefs that I have learned is they love their towns and they mean well. They will protect their towns until death do them part. So I know that if it's another agency offering help, it needs to be the help that they need and not something that they see as a threat. So I believe that that's one way we could attempt to, include everyone.
All right, Paul Callaghan?
Thank you. I agree with what Mark said about hiring and going into colleges or other communities. I want to focus on the background investigation and some of the, I've done over my 33 years, and 17 has been as a police, upper level management or more, so I've reviewed a lot of these, is where we run into trouble is checking if the officer was previously certified and he's at another department. We're not 100% sure we've got everything in his personnel file. There could be some type of agreement where some type of discipline doesn't go in his file. Then we check with Police Standards and Training Council to see if anything was reported there. And again, if the agency didn't report it to the police standards and training, then you're not going to find it. So there is occasion for officers that have left another department to get into another department without getting an accurate background investigation done, because it's impossible to find information that was in there. Now, the way you get through that is the New Hampshire Law Enforcement Commission has come up with a recommendation that police standards and training has all that information, and that personnel of officers, everything will be in that until a certain, I believe, 20 years after they retire. So that's in the work. Again, that's something I'm very happy about.
All right. Tracy Hayes, I saw your hand up. Wayne, you're next.
So beyond hiring process and the training to deal with the systemic issues, once again, it's the culture of the agency and the organization, and that culture starts with the sheriff and the leader of any organization. So that tone of acceptance needs to be there. Beyond that, I think a good example is the children's story, Stone Soup, where every person only has a little piece of the information, but when they bring it all together, they made a great soup and put it all into a big bowl and made it something that everybody can enjoy. And I think that goes to this as well. We need the collaboration of all the stakeholders involved, and everybody needs to bring their knowledge, their experience, and their ideas. And if we work together, we will come up with a solution to our problem.
All right. Wayne Estes.
Don, when I was the sheriff, every hire I did full-time people, whether it was dispatch or deputy or I set up a board. With dispatch, it was dispatch supervisor, at least the chief of police, and somebody else that interviewed these people, and they would rank them 1, 2, and 3. And I always went with number 1. With with the deputies, I did the same thing. Usually chiefs could be another sheriff from another county. In promotions, one of the times I did promotions, I actually brought a chief in from within the county, a sheriff from another county, and a Supreme Court justice to do the interviews. And I always went with the number 1 candidate. And then nobody could say I was biased towards anybody. And there was some friends that wanted to move from a police department to the sheriff's office. If they came in number 2, they didn't get the job. And I would tell them they were number 2. I look at the taxpayers' money as, I got to get the best qualified person for the job. And then the officers that were retiring that I wanted to come down and work per diem for me, I would talk to the chief of police from the community they were retiring and see if there was anything that wasn't in the personnel file.
All right. We do have several questions that have now been forwarded from the audience, and everyone will get a chance to answer if they would like. But the first question is directed to Brandon Drysdale. What are the risks of relying on part-time or per diem officers? Can you guarantee they would have the same level of training, for example?
Well, currently all law enforcement requires 8 hours of annual training to be reported to PSTC, and that does not, that's police standards and training, and that does not include use of force training, which is a 4-hour mandatory classroom, as well as firearms. During the time that I was at the sheriff's office, we required those agencies to provide us proof. The officer had to provide proof that their agency provided certain training, specifically the stuff that was related to the mandatory requirements under police standards and training, like the 8 hours of training. If we hire per diem and part-time law enforcement, we would require them to spend time with a field training officer, and that field training officer would document their proficiency as well as competency in areas at the sheriff's office. For instance, we rely on them a lot, those per diems and part-time law enforcement officers, for transportation of prisoners. So we make sure they're properly trained with chains and shackles and handcuffs, as well as things like the stun cuff that we would use in trials. So we definitely make sure that we provide them with that training and we document that and that they show a level of proficiency. But we'd also make sure that we mandated certain trainings outside their agency, like mental health training and bias-based training, so we could have that agency-wide. It is sometimes a challenge to be able to pull in 40 people who work part-time at another agency in order to bring them in for the training. But I've seen it done when the sheriff says we have a mandatory training that has to be done because it's important to the agency. I've seen people make accommodations to make sure they're there so we can get that done.
All right. Anyone else want to answer that question? Okay, Paul Callaghan.
Sure. Just to add just a little bit, is I would, effective by 2024, that 8 hours of mandatory training is going to be a minimum of 24 hours. So I would want to ensure that any per diem that we have receives the same exact training that our officers have in implicit bias and de-escalation.
All right. All right, the next question from the audience is directed to Tracy Hayes. To start, what are some of the new approaches to community engagement that you would implement as sheriff?
So when I was hired at the Rochester Police Department, I was hired as in a new position called the Problem-Oriented Policing Officer. And when I was in that position, I wasn't given a whole lot of direction. I was told, here are problems, go out and fix them. So I had to come up with ideas to think outside the box. One of the main things I did was actually began to speak to people and engage that community. And before too long, it actually turned into a position called the Community Engagement Officer, because that's really the crux of what I did, was build those relationships with the community. I eventually ended up winning several awards. One from the Masons is the Community Builders Award, the first one they gave out in 205 years, as well as other awards, Community Ambassador Award, and even built relationships with the businesses, which ended up leading to me winning the Law Enforcement Partner of the Year Award for the Retailers Association. So I think the bottom line is it's going to be boots on the ground and having people out there with the community and speaking to them and engaging their ideas. And in order to do that, the leader of the organization needs to send those people out.
All right, Paul Callaghan.
Don, as I mentioned in my opening, I did this. I've trained deputies. They receive at least 16 hours a year in training in substance abuse disorders. And they go out into the community and they could do compliance checks on these drug court clients that I mentioned earlier. That's community policing or community engagement.
All right. Anyone else want to jump in on that question?
Don, again, I implemented that program.
All right. The next question, again, is directed to all of you. So whoever would like to answer the question first, raise your hand. How are body cams now being used by the sheriff's office? And what, if anything, would you change about how to use body cams? Mark Brave, your hand went up quickly.
Yeah, I read it in the notes just so everyone knows. We don't use body cams. We have vehicle, like transport van cams. That would change day one. Obviously, you guys all know that the sheriff's office does not have a patrol unit, but the closest unit we have to a patrol unit is the civil unit. You see these deputies out serving civil processes, evictions or whatnot. But I would say I would, day one, require them to use body cams. Again, the sheriff's office, we have it for transport vans, but we don't have them on our civil unit, and that would change day one. And the civil unit would be incorporated with my community response team, which would be the deputies that are going into the PDs, talking to the chiefs, talking to the sergeants, lieutenants, captains. What can we do to help you? And I believe that that would start to bridge the gap. Again, it's not going to happen overnight, but that's one of my ideas.
Brandon Drysdale.
Yes, Don. I just read recently the National Institute of Justice said that body cameras may be beneficial and that there's a lot of research that's still needed before they can come up with a conclusion. I also just read that the Pew Research Institute Center said that they has not, after studying 70 studies, that they have not seen a change in behavior of officers or citizens. It's not statistically significant with the use of body cameras. And also it doesn't change the citizens' view of police. I think really people need to understand what our function is at the sheriff's office. We do a lot of prisoner transportation. And that prisoner transportation, it's going from jails to processing facilities, to courts, to the federal building, to immigration, to hospitals, right across the street to the Stratford County Superior Court. All of these functions are already covered under a very robust camera system by all of those places: hospitals, jails, courts, inside and outside of buildings. And also the prisoner transportation vans already have audio and video. So you're really not getting a lot of benefit for a lot of cost when it comes to prisoner transportation. And lastly, because I know I'm starting to run out of time here, when it comes to civil process, do we really need to videotape people serving pieces of paperwork in people's door and handing them pieces of paperwork? I really just don't see how effective that is going to be as far as the cost. We don't patrol, we don't stop a lot of cars, we're not primary first responders. I just don't think that's an effective use of resources, especially in a difficult climate right now as COVID-19. We just laid off 10 people and aren't filling 3 other positions. Thank you.
Mark Brave, you had your hand up, a quick rebuttal.
Yeah, so those are great numbers, great facts. So in my opinion, those are the officers where we start with, okay? Because if a camera and someone overseeing them in their actions aren't affecting them or affecting the community's idea of what they are and who they are, then guess what? That agency has an issue with the community. And that officer has an issue with being an officer, because if he or she does not care that there's someone that's a supervisor that is going to review that footage every month for CALEA compliance, okay, or annually, then guess what? That person should not be in a uniform, period, okay? And data can say all it wants, but what I say is, if there's someone that is not abiding by their oath or the rules that are set forth for law enforcement, even if there's an overseer of that, then that's an issue. That's, in law enforcement world, that's a clue. So,
right. Wayne Estes and then Tracy Hayes. Wayne?
Yeah, Don, it's driven by budget, and Mark said, that I caught that day one, they would have body cameras. Well, first, it's going to be in the budget to get that. And nothing really against Mark. I just wanted to bring that point. Budgetary things the budget's being probably prepared now. From when I was back there, I had to have it submitted by October 1st to the county administrator, my budget request. And so how could he say day one? And I pretty much agree with Brandon. There's so many cameras out there. Would it be nice if every officer had cameras? Yes, but I don't think that the county is willing to cough up the money. We go back to training. My budget for training for 45 sworn officers, my full-time and part-time, was $2,000. Every time I put in for more, they denied me. Every year I got $2,000 for training for 45 sworn officers.
And Tracy Hayes?
I think that the issue with body cameras and the reason that so many of the public want body cameras is an issue with trusting the law enforcement officers, trusting the agency. And if the community had trust that the officers were always doing the right thing, then I don't believe the body cameras would necessarily be a huge issue. And having that trust will start with the leader of the organization. It'll start with that sheriff of setting that tone of accountability.
All right. The next question, again from the audience, and whoever would like to answer, if you could just raise your hand and we will call upon you. This question asks, what specific areas of the Sheriff's Department need to be addressed, improved, or changed? Who's going to jump in first on this one? Paul Callaghan.
I mentioned this already, that we need to improve our training. As you've heard, Dawn, is our deputies are scattered all through New England. So it's difficult to get them all in one place at one time for training. But as a sheriff, as the leader of the agency, we need to I will prioritize training. We need more than 8 hours, the mandatory training we get. As you've heard, we have a civil department that's out there in the roads all the time. There's nothing to say that they're not going to drive up to some serious crime that's occurring, or to back up another agency that's involved in a serious incident. So training needs to improve, and day one, I will get moving on that as sheriff.
Anyone else? Tracy Hayes.
So having experienced discrimination both personally and professionally, I think one of the things that needs to change is that acceptance piece. We also need to make sure that we hold our officers accountable when they're doing something wrong. But beyond that, I agree with Paul Callaghan that training is a huge issue. One of the main things that we have been working on, that I personally have been working on, is training in mental health. So I've taught mental health awareness classes to our court security personnel. That's going to be expanded to our law enforcement sworn personnel as well. And I believe that the CIT program, the Crisis Intervention Team program, that we're currently working on being able to be opened up to all area agencies, so that all officers within Stratford County will have the ability to become trained and have a tool in their tool belt to be able to better deal with mental health crisis situations.
Anyone else? All right, we have one last question that we are going to pose to all of you. And we will start with Mark Brave, and we'll work our way down alphabetically. We've heard a lot this evening about the Sheriff's Department itself, the roles of the Sheriff's Department. What, in your estimation, is the most important role of the Office of High Sheriff of Stratford County, the office that you are seeking?
I believe the most important part is the deputies that will be working and being my eyes and ears if elected. Because again, the leader could have all of the best intentions, but if we're not hiring and recruiting the best people for the job, then we have issues, okay? No matter, I could be elected and a year from now, I could have major issues in my office due to the fact that I'm not hiring the right people for the job. So one of my plans is I'm reaching out to every single community that I can in Stratford County, to include the Indonesian community, because they are not represented in any law enforcement aspect. They're targeted in some aspects, but they're not represented. So again, day one, I would reach out to the leaders of those communities and try to get some of the young men and women that are in those communities to join our agency and maybe be the voice that community deserves. Same with Hispanics, Blacks, Indians, Lebanese, whatever. I think we need to start matching what our community is becoming, and whether anyone likes it or not, that's what it's becoming into the future. So I'm going to be that sheriff that opens the door to every aspect of our office.
All right, thank you very much. Paul Callaghan, in your estimation, the most important role of that High Sheriff of Stratford County?
The most important role of being sheriff of Stratford County is being the leader. It starts at the top, and you set the tone. I have a wide breadth of experience and knowledge and education. I have my master's degree in public administration from UNH, where I graduated with honors while I was working as a captain and raising 3 kids. I've received just numerous trainings through Northeastern University, Chief Executive Law Enforcement Command School, the FBI Leadership School, and many others. I've done everything in police work in my 33 years, and I've done it well. I've got numerous awards, the state and federal level, for the work I've done. So to summarize, the most important position for the sheriff is to lead the agency to reform that's coming down the road really quickly.
All right. Brandon Drysdale, same question. The most important role of the High Sheriff of Stratford County.
Yeah, Don, we need to lead the sheriff's office into a better future. My goal is to run a highly professional and efficient agency that will serve our community well. I'm determined to ensure our deputies have the latest training while addressing the concerns that have been echoed throughout the country. And I will also get feedback from our residents about things that we can improve on at the agency. We need to be a leader as the sheriff to bridge relationships with local, state, and federal law enforcement, because when law enforcement works together, it provides the best service and helps keep communities safe. And that's what I plan on doing if I become sheriff. So thank you. And thank you everyone for tonight for having me here.
All right. And Wayne Estes, the most important role of the High Sheriff of Stratford County.
Is to lead by example and to make sure all the deputies treat all residents and all people that they come in contact with respect. You know, and I have to mention to you, Don, you said a high sheriff a couple of times now. There's nothing in the law, in the Constitution, or anything that is high sheriff. It's just sheriff. Just to bring that up to you. And also, you've said sheriff's department. It's an office because the sheriff is elected. It's not a department. It's an office. So it's sheriff's office. You know, just a little rub into you, Don. We go back quite a few years.
All right, thank you very much. And lastly, Tracy Hayes, your thoughts on what is the most important role of the Sheriff of Stratford County?
Yeah, so like everyone else, I agree. The sheriff needs to be so much more than a good officer. The sheriff really needs to be a great leader. And I have the experience as a leader both in and out of the law enforcement field. I've already had to make command decisions as the acting sheriff at times. And outside of law enforcement leadership, I've also been the owner of 2 companies and even served as the executive director of the Cocheco Valley Humane Society in Dover and the executive director for a large nonprofit recreational facility. It's also extremely important for the sheriff to be a good steward of your taxpayer dollars. I have the education and the experience to be that leader. And if you want a sheriff with a financial background to be a good steward of your taxpayer dollars, a sheriff who leads this organization into the future progressively and with integrity, a sheriff that will set a tone of acceptance within the agency, and a sheriff that will hold officers to a high standard of accountability, then please vote for me on September 8th. I look forward to continue serving the people of Stratford County, and thank you for your time.
And we want to thank all of our candidates for appearing at our forum. We thank you for your time and your service to the community. We would also like to say thank you to our sponsors, the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce, the Falls Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Dover Chamber of Commerce, and New Hampshire Listens for organizing this forum. And also thank you to the Chamber's staffs for their technical expertise in pulling this off. It's a different world. We thank you all for joining us, and remember to vote in the New Hampshire primary on September 8th. I'm Don Bryant. Good evening.
Thanks, Don.